Hello, so we're going to continue with our unit on matter and move on to the third section, physical and chemical properties and changes. So far we have discussed the states of matter, solid, liquid, gas, the different types of matter, pure substances involving elements and compounds, and mixtures involving homogeneous and heterogeneous, and then also how to separate mixtures. We talked about distillation, which is separation based on boiling point, and filtration, which is separation based on physical property. And so now let's talk about our physical states. So now let's talk about some more physical and chemical properties. Physical and chemical changes occur all the time. So let's say you're doing one of my favorite Friday night activities, baking cookies. Did you know this entire process involves chemistry, especially physical and chemical changes? So can you think of one physical and one chemical change that's involved? So take a minute to think about it. Okay, so some examples that I came up with were mixing the ingredients. So if you take an egg, it's in one physical state in its egg form. You crack it, you mix it in with other things. Now it's, instead of being a liquid with like a yolky solid, now it's more mixed up as a paste. Chemical change, obviously baking is the primary chemical change here. We're turning our ingredients from sugar and egg and flour into this baked good that has very different properties. Okay, so by the end of this video, you should be able to identify and describe the difference between a physical and a chemical change, as well as physical and chemical properties. Okay, so let's talk about physical and chemical properties first. So a physical property is one that you can change without changing the identity of the substance. So for example, odor, color. Now don't think about coloring your hair, that's not what we're talking about here. Volume you could change without changing the identity. You have a glass of water, you pour some out, and you have less, but it's still water. The state of matter, melting an ice cube. The density, melting point, and boiling point are all examples of a physical property. Let's talk about chemical properties. Chemical property is the ability of a substance to change into a different substance. So it's how reactive is the substance. Burning wood, rusting, digestion, growing, these are all chemical properties. So now let's take those physical and chemical properties and talk about what happens when we change them. Okay, so physical and chemical changes. So physical change is a change that does not affect the composition of the substance. And it's a change basically in one or more of the physical properties. So we talked about melting an ice cube. That's a physical property. You're going from solid to liquid, but it's still water. Chemically, it's the same. So ice melting, water boiling, water freezing, those are all examples of a physical change. As far as a chemical change, this is a change in the fundamental components of the substance. So the substance changes into a different substance. We are rearranging the way that the atoms are bonded together. So we're forming something new. So any sort of reaction, tarnishing silver, a plant forming a leaf, you getting taller, all of those things are rearranging the atoms, and it's a chemical change. Okay, so let's look at your check for understanding. So we know that physical and chemical changes occur every day. So create a summary of physical and chemical changes and properties. Put each definition in your own words. And provide one common example of each. Think of one that we haven't talked about yet. Being sure to include a visual representation, so draw some sort of a picture or visual representation, as well as a description telling why the particular example fits. Okay, so coming up next, this section finishes our unit on matter. So the next unit that we're going to move on to is going to have more on atoms and elements. We're going to look at the history of the atom, and we're going to talk about the organization of the periodic table. All right, have a good day.